France once lectured Africa about chaos. Today, Paris itself is burning. Crowds clash with riot police, smoke curls through the boulevards, and the myth of stability shatters before the eyes of the world. The very republic that measured others by order has lost command of its own streets. What collapsed was not only a government. It was an illusion centuries in the making. For decades, France pretended that its grip on Africa was proof of its strength. But when Africa broke free, the empire's mask cracked. Every withdrawal from Bamako, every expulsion from Ouagadougou, every rejection from Niamey tore another thread from the fabric holding Paris together. Now, the mirror is clear, the collapse of French power abroad is the echo of collapse at home. This is not just politics. It is history folding back on itself. The colonizer stumbles, the colonized rise. And for the first time, Africa speaks while France trembles. If you believe these are truths hidden from the world, hit the like button. Let's make sure this fire of clarity cannot be ignored. On September 9, 2025, Prime Minister François Bau's government fell after losing a confidence vote on a €44 billion austerity budget. It was the fifth prime ministerial collapse since 2023. A carousel of leaders spinning with no direction. What once seemed like the myth of stability in Paris now looks like a house of cards tumbling before the cameras of the world. The fall was not a technical defeat but the inevitable snap of an overstrained system. Even French citizens whispered, if Paris cannot command itself, why should anyone else obey? But this collapse inside Paris was not born in Paris. Its roots stretched thousands of miles away, into Africa, where the empire's scaffolding was already being dismantled. What is a republic worth when it cannot command itself? France, the same state that once mocked African nations as unstable, is now living the very chaos it condemned. In the heart of Paris, power no longer flows like a steady river. It jerks, halts, and crashes like a carnival ride gone out of control. A carousel of prime ministers has spun through the Élysée palace, each one falling faster than the last. To the outside world, it looks less like a government and more like a game of musical chairs where the music never stops. François Bau's resignation was not just another piece in a political cycle. It was the fifth implosion since 2023, the fourth in just over a year under President Emmanuel Macron. Once upon a time, Paris stood as the emblem of continuity, the mythic capital of reason and order. But now, every camera that zooms in on the French National Assembly shows a house divided, deputies shouting, votes collapsing, and the veneer of stability peeling away. The irony cuts deep. The same France that once held itself as the model for Africa now finds itself mocked by the very nations it patronized. In Bamako, young Malians share clips online calling France the Bamako of Europe. In Ouagadougou, satirical sketches portray Macron not as the proud president of the republic but as a man juggling too many masks, dropping each one in embarrassment. Political instability in Paris is no longer an internal affair. It has become a global spectacle. Every resignation, every failed budget, every emergency vote is live-streamed and dissected worldwide. The myth of stability is not only broken, it is broadcast, in real time, across every smartphone from Dakar to Washington. This is humiliation magnified, like a sports team once hailed as champion now collapsing season after season. Americans would compare it to the New England Patriots going from dynasty to disaster, unable to win a single game, living only on faded glory. The political collapse of France exposes something deeper, hypocrisy. For decades, Paris sat on its high perch, measuring African leaders by the yardstick of instability. A coup in Bamako, a resignation in Ouagadougou, an uprising in Niamey, France would rush to the microphone, wagging its finger, branding entire nations as failed states. But today, it is France itself that cannot hold a cabinet together for longer than a season. The dominoes fall one by one. And the French Republic topples like those it once scolded. The boomerang of history has returned, striking Paris square in the chest. This collapse is not random. It is structural. The French political system was designed to project strength abroad, to maintain the illusion of unity even when domestic cracks widened. But that scaffolding rested on empire. For 2 centuries, France maintained its myth of stability by anchoring it to Africa, military bases, financial monopolies, resource contracts. Those were the stilts that held up the French Republic. Once those stilts were kicked away, by Mali in 2022, by Burkina Faso in 2023, by Niger in 2025, the house began to sway. Now it trembles, exposed to the wind. The French citizen understands this more clearly than any analyst. The worker in Marseille who watches troops return from the Sahel while hearing about pension cuts feels the contradiction in his bones. The farmer in Normandy who sees endless speeches about strategic redeployment, but no bread on his table knows the words are hollow. A republic that pretends to rule the world while begging its own people for sacrifice cannot last. The social contract cracks not because of ideology but because of exhaustion. The people are tired. And that exhaustion turns into resentment. The streets of Paris no longer echo with patriotic hymns but with banging pots, the clang of rebellion that Americans might compare to Boston's Tea Party. Only now, the protest is not against an external empire but against the empire within. Ordinary French people are telling their leaders what Africans once told Paris: your illusions do not feed us. Your speeches do not clothe us, your games of power do not put bread on the table. Yet France insists on wearing its mask. Officials speak of technical difficulties, of temporary instability, of political adjustments. But the world is not fooled. African leaders are not fooled. Traore in Burkina Faso openly mocked the carousel of prime ministers, asking, "Is this what stability looks like?" Goïta in Mali declared, "They told us to follow their model." Now their model is burning before their eyes. And Tiani in Niger put it more bluntly: Paris cannot govern Paris. It cannot govern Africa either. These words sting more than any bullet. Because they speak the truth, the emperor has no clothes. The collapse of France's political order is tied to something larger, the collapse of its authority as a teacher of nations. Once, Paris claimed the right to lecture others on governance, democracy, and order. Now, when it speaks, the world shrugs. What credibility remains when the lecture hall itself is on fire? And here lies the deeper symbolism. This is not only the downfall of one prime minister. It is the unraveling of an image centuries old. France as the light of reason, France as the stable republic. France as the guardian of democracy. All of it fades like old paint peeling from a wall. What remains is raw reality, a country stumbling, exhausted, unmasked. If you see the hypocrisy, if you believe the world must hear the story hidden in plain sight, leave your comment. Every comment is a voice that breaks the silence. Every voice is part of the movement to hold truth above illusion. A nation that once sold discipline now lives on debt. That is the story of France in 2025. For decades, Paris paraded itself as the stern professor of economic order, lecturing the world about fiscal discipline, austerity, and the virtues of living within one's means. Yet behind the curtain, the professor himself was drowning. France's debt now stands at 3.4 trillion euros, 114 to 115% of GDP. Nearly double the European Union's so-called responsible limit. Since 1973, France has not balanced a single budget. For half a century, it has lived in deficit, stacking one brick of debt upon another until the entire house leaned, trembling, against collapse. This debt is not just numbers on a ledger. It is a parasite feeding on the state. Every euro borrowed is a drop of blood drained from the future. For years, Paris could disguise this with pomp, grand speeches at the UN, ceremonies at the Élysée, military parades down the Champs-Élysées. But in 2025, the disguise has fallen. The parasite shows. France is revealed not as the disciplined master but as a debtor gasping for air. The Bew government thought it could cure this with austerity, euro 44 billion in cuts, higher taxes. Frozen pensions. It was a fantasy. The assembly rejected it. The streets erupted. From Paris to Marseille, citizens banged pots and pans, roaring their fury into the night. It was not only opposition to cuts. It was opposition to hypocrisy. Why should the worker sacrifice when the state still clings to its illusion of global power? Why should the retired teacher tighten her belt while Macron speaks of strategic redeployment in Africa as if France still held an empire? The contradiction was unbearable. On one hand, the Republic was bleeding its citizens dry, demanding discipline. On the other, it was pretending to police the world, as though still a power among giants. The French people saw through the act. Austerity, they said, was not a plan. It was a punishment. The anger in the streets echoed the fury once imposed on Africa. For decades. Paris, backed by the IMF, the World Bank, and its own institutions, forced African states into structural adjustment. Countries in crisis were told to privatize, to cut social spending, to freeze pensions, to sacrifice for discipline. Mali in the 1980s, Burkina Faso in the 1990s, Niger again and again, each was lectured by Paris. Tighten your belts, the French ministers would say. This is the medicine of responsibility. But now, when the medicine comes to Paris, France spits it out. It blames COVID, it blames war, it blames the world. Never does it blame itself. The hypocrisy is too thick to ignore. Africans see it. Leaders in Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey mock the double standards. When we tightened our belts, they called it discipline. One Malian commentator wrote, but when they refuse austerity, they call it democracy. The words cut deep because they reveal the truth. France never sold discipline. It sold domination. And now, stripped of empire, the product no longer works. Credit agencies have noticed. Investors whisper the same words once whispered about Africa: instability, unpredictability, unreliability. France, the teacher, has become the student who failed his own exam. The downgrade of its credit rating was not just a financial adjustment. It was a moral verdict. The world sees France as it once saw the economies of the South, weak, wobbly, at risk. This is the empire of sand collapsing. Macron's speeches cannot hold it up. Strategic redeployment is not strategy, it is denial. Every French soldier flown home from Africa is another reminder: the empire is gone, the fantasy ended. The people know this. That is why they refused austerity. They refused to sacrifice for a myth. Imagine this through an American lens. It is as if Washington demanded austerity while still pretending to run an empire from Vietnam to Iraq. It is as if, after losing its wars, it still told its citizens to pay the price for global illusions. Americans remember the anger of the Vietnam era: students burning draft cards, cities rioting, the chant of "No More War" echoing across campuses. Today, Paris lives its own Vietnam moment, but the battlefield is its economy. The empire collapses at home. The French worker knows it. The French farmer knows it. The French youth knows it. They see austerity not as medicine but as betrayal. They see debt not as a statistic but as a chain. And they see their leaders clinging to illusions instead of truth. Yet Paris continues to deny. Macron insists that France is still a great power. Ministers talk of temporary turbulence. But in Africa, leaders laugh. They know the truth: a nation that cannot balance its books cannot balance its empire. Burkina Faso builds with gold, not debt. Mali invests in sovereignty, not illusions. Niger turns to new alliances, not broken promises. The contrast is blinding. If you believe this double standard must be exposed, share your voice. Leave a comment. Every word you write is a hammer against the mask of hypocrisy. Together, voices build the sound of truth. Every French soldier leaving Africa was a nail in Paris's coffin. That is not rhetoric, it is reality. When Mali ordered the French out in 2022, it was more than a military redeployment. It was a declaration, the empire is finished. Burkina Faso followed in 2023. With Ibrahim Traore stating clearly that sovereignty was not negotiable. In 2024, Chad tore up its defense pact. And in 2025, Niger sealed the divorce, expelling diplomats, breaking military ties, and walking out of the Francophonie. Each step was not just politics, it was the unraveling of a centuries-old illusion. For Paris, every plane lifting off African soil carried more than troops. It carried away prestige, leverage, and the myth of relevance. For Africa, each departure was a sunrise. In Bamako, young people cheered as bases were emptied. In Ouagadougou, murals appeared overnight depicting Traore as a warrior breaking chains. In Niamey, children sang songs about independence, replacing the tricolor flag with their own. The reversal of history is stunning. For decades, France called Africa the burden, the unstable continent, the student. Today, it is France that looks burdened, unstable, and lost. African leaders have turned the mirror around, showing Paris the face it once mocked. They told us to copy their model, said a Burkinabe commentator, but now their model is collapsing while ours is being rebuilt. The irony is sharp. And the world is watching. This rise is not accidental. It is calculated. The AES alliance, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, is more than a defense pact. It is a declaration of sovereignty. These nations are not waiting for Paris or Brussels to define stability. They are building their own. New industries sprout where military barracks once stood. Agricultural projects, powered by local resources, feed communities that were once dependent on imports. Gold from Burkina is no longer siphoned off to Paris but invested into local infrastructure, canals, roads, factories. Mali channels its resources into schools and defense, not foreign debt payments. Niger is designing trade corridors that link to BRICS partners, bypassing the old monopoly. The old order said Africa could not survive without Paris. The new order shows Paris cannot survive without Africa. That is the final insult, and the final truth. Yet Paris clings to denial. Macron speaks of strategic redeployment, as if withdrawal was a master plan. French media tries to frame Africa's defiance as temporary populism. But no one is fooled. The images are too clear, empty French bases. African flags raised, new alliances forged. The train of sovereignty has left the station, and Paris is not on board. In Washington, some compare this to the American Revolution. 13 colonies once told the British Empire, no more taxes, no more troops, no more control. Today, the Sahel speaks the same language. No more CFA, no more soldiers, no more Paris. Americans can imagine the resonance. It is 1776 again, but this time the declaration is written in Bamako, in Ouagadougou, in Niamey. This is not only politics, it is cultural rebirth. Musicians in Mali sing anthems of freedom, rappers in Ouagadougou record tracks mocking Paris, filmmakers in Niger document the pride of sovereignty. The rise is not measured only in GDP or trade figures. It is measured in the confidence of a people who no longer bow their heads. And this confidence is contagious. Across Africa, nations are watching. Senegal questions the French presence. Central African Republic already turned to new partners. Ghana debates monetary independence. Even in places once thought unshakably tied to Paris, the question is whispered, if Mali can break free, why not us? This is the power of example. One act of defiance in Bamako becomes a song in Kinshasa, a headline in Nairobi, a mural in Accra. It spreads like wildfire, igniting imaginations. That is the true revolution, not only the removal of soldiers, but the rewriting of what Africans believe is possible. And in the middle of this storm, young leaders like Traore embody a new spirit. He does not speak in the careful phrases of diplomacy. He speaks in the language of defiance, of sovereignty, of dignity. To Africans, he sounds like the echo of Thomas Sankara reborn. But also like something new, a leader forged by the failures of the past and determined not to repeat them. At this moment, we must pause. If you stand with this wave of sovereignty, if you believe Africa Rising is more than a slogan, leave your comment below. Every comment is not just text. It is solidarity. It tells the world that this movement is not isolated. That people from across continents recognize it. This is your chance to stand with a generation writing history. Because history is being written. Not in Paris, not in Brussels, but in Bamako, Ouagadougou, Niamey. The capitals once mocked as unstable are now the architects of a new order. And Paris, the so-called City of Light, now wanders in darkness. Searching for relevance it can no longer find. This reversal cannot be undone. You cannot force the sun to rise in the west. You cannot tell free people to kneel again. The age of lectures is over. The age of sovereignty has begun. And Africa is no longer asking for permission. The final twist is the cruelest of all. France, once the empire, now needs Africa more than Africa needs France. For decades, Paris told Africans they were dependent, fragile, unable to survive without French guidance. But strip away the illusion, and it is Paris that stands exposed. French factories rely on uranium from Niger, gold from Burkina Faso, oil from Chad. French banks lived off CFA profits extracted from African economies. French governments paraded strength through military bases planted across the Sahel. Without Africa, France is not just weaker, it is revealed as hollow. The numbers do not lie. As Niger cut uranium exports, French energy giants trembled. As Burkina redirected gold to domestic projects, Paris's deficit grew wider. As Mali turned its trade corridors toward new partners, French influence shrank into irrelevance. These are not symbolic gestures, they are economic earthquakes. The empire did not collapse because of speeches. It collapsed because Africa pulled the plugs that kept Paris alive. And this is the naked truth, France has become the burden. Its debts crush its people, its politics spiral into chaos, its economy clings to artificial lifelines. Without Africa, the mask falls, and the republic stares into the mirror of its own decline. The irony is unbearable. The nation that once labeled Africa a failed state is now branded with the same words: unstable, unreliable, unpredictable. Credit agencies, investors, analysts, using the very language France once used to judge Africa, now whisper it about Paris. History has flipped the script. And France is the student who failed its own exam. In Africa, the laughter is sharp but not cruel. It is the laughter of recognition. People understand that the humiliation of Paris is not revenge, it is revelation. They know France does not crumble because Africa cursed it. It crumbles because Africa no longer feeds it. For young Africans, this twist is liberation. They see clearly that sovereignty is not a dream. It is leverage. It is power. And once it is claimed, the empire's threats dissolve into smoke. The French soldier, once feared, is now only a memory. The French lecture, once obeyed, is now ignored. The French handshake, once binding, is now irrelevant. For ordinary French citizens, the twist is painful. Many realize they were lied to. They were told Africa was the dependent one. They now see that Africa was the foundation, and when that foundation was removed, their own house collapsed. The bitterness of betrayal lingers. But history offers no rewinds. You cannot rebuild a myth once it is broken. You cannot reimpose chains once they have been shattered. France may still speak loudly, but Africa no longer listens. And the world watching closely, begins to nod, perhaps the age of Paris is over. If you feel this reversal is the real hidden truth, that the empire has become the dependent, then add your voice. Leave a comment. History is not written by governments alone. It is written by those who dare to name what others hide. The story is no longer about France. It is about Africa stepping into the light. The collapse of Paris is not an ending, it is the clearing of the stage. On that stage now stand Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, raising their voices with courage the world can no longer ignore. History is not written by those who cling to illusions. It is written by those who dare to break chains. And today, Africa is writing. It is writing in gold and grain, in sovereignty and solidarity. In the laughter of children who no longer salute a foreign flag. France's empire has ended. Africa's age has begun. And it will not be reversed. If this truth reaches you, do not let it fade. Like this video, leave your comment, and subscribe. Your action is not small. It is a spark in a movement larger than any one of us. Together, we ensure this fire does not die. Now it is our turn, to keep the flame alive, to carry the story forward, to stand with Africa rising.